These are 10 cards you should always draft in Secrets of Strixhaven. Now, always is a bit of a strong word, so let's just say these are cards you should strongly consider when you see them in packs because they are fantastic and will help you win more games. But first, today's video is sponsored by Void Monster, an online shop started by MTG artist Forest ML that creates unique TCG-inspired game accessories and apparel. Every month, there is a new release of exclusive items available only for a limited time, with custom artwork from real artists and no use of AI. This month's drop is the Green Collection, which features a playmat, deck box, sleeves, and a card binder. The pre-order period is open now and ends May 3rd at noon Pacific time, so if you want to pick something up, use my link in the description to head to voidmonster.org before the window closes. Thanks Void Monster for sponsoring this video. Now to the cards. First up is Colossus of the Blood Age. For 4 red-white, you get a 6/6 artifact creature. When this creature enters, it deals 3 damage to each opponent, and you gain 3 life. When this creature dies, discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards plus 1. This is just the perfect top-end card for any red-white deck. There are some that are going to lean more aggressive, and in those cases, dealing 3 to your opponent is pretty significant. There are some that are going to lean more defensive. In that case, gaining 3 is the more significant part of that equation. And then when it dies, you're going to be happy no matter what, because not only are you guaranteed to get like more cards than you discard. So if you have no cards in your hand, then you're going to draw at least 1 card, which means this dies into a card, gives you some card advantage. But at that stage of the game, lands are not really cards that you're going to ever want. So if you can like hoard a couple of lands in your hand when you have Colossus of the Blood Age in play before your opponent is able to deal with it, then you just get to basically cycle through those lands and hopefully draw into more spells. And so not only is it a top end card that can help stabilize you, help finish the game if your opponent's on a low life total, but if your opponent does manage to deal with it, because most removal or trading it in combat is going to involve it dying instead of getting exiled or something like that, you're going to get to not only draw a card, but also cycle through a bunch of cards that are maybe useless for that stage of the game with your lands. And that is just going to be really, really strong and definitely a card that you really want to take highly in this format. In Secrets of Strixhaven, because there are 5 supported archetypes instead of the normal 10, it does mean that you can have more leeway to take these multicolored cards aggressively because they're much more likely to end up in your final deck than they would in a typical format where there are 10 supported archetypes instead of 5. Next up is Environmental Scientist. For 1 and a green, you get a 2/2 human druid. When this creature enters, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. This is just a really great 2-drop for any green deck. A 2-mana 2/2 that basically draws you a card and helps you hit your land drops is just fantastic. It's getting you card advantage because if you end up trading the 2/2 for something else, you're up that land that you were able to search up. It's really good if you're trying to do some mana fixing. So if you have a card you want to splash, Environmental Scientist really helps with that because it can search for any basic land, regardless of whether that's in your main colors. And just hitting your land drops is really good, especially in the early turns of the game. So it's just going to be an effective card, and there are some X spells in this format, so hitting your land drops in the late game can be relevant as well. There are some payoffs for splashing, so Scientist helps you do that. Overall, just a really good 2-drop and a card you're going to be happy in having in any green deck. Even if you're not splashing, this is going to be great. It just gets especially good if you are splashing because it can help you search up those lands that aren't in your main colors. Next up is Strixhaven Sky Coach, a very similar card. It's 3 mana for a 3/2 vehicle with flying. When this vehicle enters, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle, and the crew cost is 2, which is a pretty moderate crew cost. It does mean that sometimes you'll have like a 1/1 that can't crew this, but generally you'll be able to take turn your creatures into your Strixhaven Sky Coach and then take to the skies and hit them for 3. So a 3/2 flyer for 3 as a vehicle wouldn't be crazy, but again, this does search your library for that basic land, so it does get you that card advantage by getting you a land. So if the Sky Coach trades, you're still up that land that you got. And importantly, it's colorless, which means it helps you do splashing in colors that aren't base green. So if you're playing like a red-white deck and want to splash a blue card, Strixhaven Sky Coach is a really good card for that. And again, it's still just getting you card advantage. It's still just a good card in a 2-color deck, gets you a land, so if it does trade off with something, you're going to be pretty happy to have played the Strixhaven Sky Coach. And generally speaking, a 3/2 flyer is going to make a pretty big impact on combat. If you're trying to do some attacking, it can definitely attack through for decent chunks of damage and be a pretty formidable threat that your opponent is going to feel like they have to deal with, and then when they do, you're still up that card that you got. So a really nice 3-drop. Those cards are really strong. Next up is Snarl Song. For 5 and a green, you get a sorcery that says Converge. Create 2/0/0 green and blue fractal creature tokens. Put X +1/+1 counters on each of them, and you gain X life, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. Now, Snarl Song is the sort of card that really wants to go into a splashy green deck that's trying to be able to play at least 4 colors, because making 2 4/4s for 6 mana and gaining 4 life is an absolutely stellar Magic the Gathering card. The thing is, in a lot of formats, that would be a much more narrow card, and so I wouldn't recommend taking it as highly. In this format, however, there are a lot of tools to fix your mana, splash cards like this in your green decks in particular. And so Snarl Song ends up being a really strong payoff that kind of incentivizes you to go in this kind of splashy direction, because there are already a lot of multicolored cards that maybe you would want to splash, and Snarl Song is kind of just a nice kind of fit into decks that already exist, and as such is a really strong payoff and a card that's worth prioritizing, because when you play this for X equals 4, like 4 colors almost, it's not an X spell, but converge 4 colors, it's really, really powerful. And if you do it for 5 colors, it's really hard to beat, because 2 5/5s for 6 mana and gaining 5 life, if you're against an aggro deck, it's almost impossible to beat. And even against a more controlling or mid-range deck, 5/5s are cards that have to be answered with real cards. So you're just getting a huge amount of value, giant amount of stats for just 6 mana. This card is really, really strong if you can enable it, and there are the tools to enable it in this format. Even doing it for 4 colors is really strong. And if you are playing a deck that can get to 4 colors, but maybe sometimes has to cast this for 3 colors, that's not the end of the world either. You don't want this in like a dedicated 2-color deck. 6 mana to make 2 2/2s and gain 2 life isn't good. But if you are playing these splashy green decks, which do exist, we just looked at some tools to fix your mana, Snarl Song can be a absolutely stellar card, and as such, it's worth prioritizing because it can incentivize you to build those sorts of decks. Next up is Elite Interceptor, the complete opposite end of the spectrum. It's 1 mana for a 1/2. This creature enters prepared, and its prepared spell is Rejoinder. 1 and a white. You may tap or untap target creature, draw a card. So it's a cheap card, comes down early in the game, and then it can just temporarily get rid of a blocker. Generally, that's going to be the use case while drawing you a card. Helps you continue attacking, put pressure on your opponent, and it's also going to trigger your repartee cards. There are cards in this set that care about you targeting creatures with instants and sorceries. Elite Interceptor really helps you do that. So 1 drop can do a little bit of chip damage, then like tap something to help you get even more damage through while triggering your cards. Just absolutely fantastic. Just what you're looking to do in your white aggressive decks. And it's just going to be a really strong card as a result. Just getting these cards that kind of replace themselves. You've seen a lot of examples of this in this list. And the cards that are going to like draw you cards, replace themselves in some way, are going to be really, really formidable. And this is a great common as a result. Next up is Impractical Joke. For a single red mana, you get a sorcery that says damage can't be prevented this turn. Impractical Joke deals 3 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. So very simple, very straightforward. 1 mana, deal 3, sorcery speed. Just a great removal spell, and one that you want to be taking highly. There are a lot of cheap threats in this format that can kind of snowball thanks to the repartee mechanic and just other types of cards like that in general. And if you are able to kill them early on in the game, it can buy you so much time that lets you maybe get your late game going. Or if you're playing an aggressive deck yourself and you use your card like Impractical Joke, then you can like pressure your opponent even more effectively. Because if you go like turn 2, play a 2-drop, turn 2, play a 2-drop and Impractical Joke, their 3-drop or whatever the curve ends up being, then you end up in a really good spot. And because 1 mana deal 3 is such a large amount of damage for just 1 mana, you can often kill like 3-drops with this or things like that are more expensive. And that gives you a lot of tempo because you've spent 1 mana to answer something that they spent a lot more mana on. And so Impractical Joke, a card that's really worth taking highly. It's like sorcery speed, removal spells tend to be worse than instant speed ones, but when they're so efficient that you can just slip these into turns and kill like 3 drops for 1 mana, you're going to be really happy playing this card and should take it very, very highly. Next up is Silverquill Charm. For white-black, you get an instant that says choose 1. Put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature. Exile target creature with power 2 or less. Each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. Generally, I would say that the modes that you're going to be choosing with this are kind of from top to bottom. If you are in a combat situation where you can spend 2 mana to put 2 counters on your creature and win the combat, you're going to be absolutely thrilled, and you're probably going to like be in a very good position after doing that because your threat is permanently grown and you've dealt with one of your opponents for just 2 mana. That's a very efficient trade of resources and makes Silverquill Charm a really scary combat trick in that regard. The second mode, where you can exile target creature with power 2 or less, can definitely come up and be very relevant, especially if you are facing, for example, a creature that has very high toughness but low power, maybe costs a little bit more mana as a result, and so you can maybe like get a little bit of mana advantage with this, or sometimes your opponent plays a really scary 2-drop that you just have to be able to kill. Maybe it's a rare or something like that, and you just have to be able to answer it, and Silverquill Charm being a removal spell in those situations is really nice. And then the third mode, if your opponent is at exactly 3 life or less, just having that little bit of extra reach in your deck can be nice. Maybe you're in a kind of rough situation, but you can make like a big all-out attack to get your opponent to 3, so that if you top deck your Silverquill Charm, you win the game. Those sorts of situations do come up, and having that third mode is definitely good upside to have on a very powerful charm. Next up is Stress Stream, another multicolored card. As I said before, these multicolored cards can be taken more aggressively because of the nature of the format with the 5 supported archetypes instead of 10. Stress Stream is 3 blue-red for an instant. Stress Stream deals 5 damage to up to 1 target creature. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library. So 5 mana, deal 5 at instant speed wouldn't be the greatest card, but the fact that you then look at the top 2 and get to take a card from among them means that you're generally going to be able to find like a spell in your top 2, so you can chain Stress Stream into something else that's good to play for the following turn, hopefully. And it's also pretty splashable, so if you're playing like a green-blue deck, then splashing the red mana for Stress Stream definitely very doable. So it's even a little bit more flexible than some of the other multicolored cards, because it's not one that you have to play in the early turns. If you play this in the late game, you're still going to be pretty happy. Stress Stream also works well with the blue-red mechanic, which is Opus, which rewards you for casting instants and sorceries, but also specifically instants and sorceries that cost 5 or more mana, or that you're spending 5 or more mana to use. And so Stress Stream will be triggering a lot of your cards when you are playing this in a blue-red deck with those payoffs in it. So Stress Stream, a really great card for just power level reasons, and also for synergy reasons, and also for splashing reasons. So a really good card. And then the next card we have is Pestbrood Sloth. For 3 and a green, you get a 4/4 Plant Sloth with Reach. When this creature dies, create 2 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens. With whenever this token attacks, you gain 1 life. So, might not be the flashiest card, but a 4-mana 4/4 is good stats. Reach gives it nice defensive abilities, which is great because green often can be a more defensive deck. And when it dies, you're going to get 2 1/1s that can chump block, attack in for damage sometimes, be used for like double block purposes. There's just a lot of uses for those tokens, and even though Pestbrood Sloth doesn't as directly die into a card like maybe some of the other things we've looked at, it doesn't necessarily say, oh, when Pestbrood Sloth enters, draw a card. Dying into a couple of 1/1s is like dying into another card, because if you were to play a card that made a couple of 1/1s, you'd be willing to spend a couple of mana and like a spell from your hand to do that, and Pestbrood Sloth just dies and makes you those 2 1/1s, and so that's really good like kind of card advantage, and also a really good stabilization tool, because if your opponent is trying to like pressure your life total and you play a Pestbrood Sloth, they have to go through so much work to get through your life total at that point, to get like start dealing damage to you again, because they not only have to kill the Pestbrood Sloth, but then they have to also kill the chump blockers that are going to come when the Pestbrood Sloth dies. And if you like make a block with Pestbrood Sloth and they use a combat trick, you're not even that unhappy, because you end up with a couple of 1/1s that can also keep your life total relatively stable. So just a really nice 4-drop right at the good point in the curve where you're trying to like stabilize with some decks, or if you're trying to be a more aggressive deck even, you can attack in with this. If they trade it off, you're still left with some pressure on the board. You've still got those 2 1/1s that can maybe attack into your opponent as well. So just a really good green card, and one you should be taking very highly. And then the final card we're looking at is Practiced Scrollsmith. For red-white hybrid, white, so 3 mana, you get a 3/2 Dwarf Cleric with First Strike. So 3 mana, 3/2 First Strike is pretty good. Higher power than toughness is just really nice for First Strike in general, because your creature is oftentimes going to be able to take out threats, or threaten to take out threats, so they can't like even block it with a 3 toughness creature generally. And when this creature enters, exile target non-creature, non-land card from your graveyard, so oftentimes that's going to be an instant or a sorcery. Until the end of your next turn, you may cast that card. So the red-white theme cares about cards leaving your graveyard, so not only is this a good rate, it's a 3 mana 3/2 First Strike, but it's also going to be a good synergy tool, because it'll have a card leave your graveyard to trigger your other payoffs that care about that happening in your red-white deck. And it's getting you card advantage, because if you're exiling an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, or an enchantment, because it's just non-creature, non-land card, and then you're able to cast it, that's getting you a 2-for-1. Again, these 2-for-1s are really powerful. This one's attached to a good stat line that also has great synergy with the color combination. Practiced Scrollsmith is fantastic, and a card that you really should be prioritizing. That's going to do it for this list, though. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag 10wins in the comment section down below, because these cards are winners and will help you win more games. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.